Well, for more on this, we are joined by Rob Harris, who is a football journalist for the Associated Press. Rob, we've said that this is complicated. Why have Kuwait and Oman now emerged as potential hosts to share this World Cup with Qatar?
Well, Gianni Infantino, the FIFA president, now for years has been looking at trying to expand the World Cup from 32 to 48 teams, a principle already agreed for the 2026 tournament in North America. The problem is, obviously, Qatar is already logistically stretched with those 8 stadiums hosting 32 teams in 28 days in 2022. So the only way realistically of expanding and adding another 16 teams, another 16 games, is spreading it in the region. The problem is, given the way the regional diplomatic crisis is at the moment, the Saudi-led boycott of Qatar, it's impossible to consider games being in the UAE and Saudi Arabia. So what I understand is now Gianni Infantino has been nudging towards the possibility of games in Kuwait and Oman, which are neutral in the crisis.
So Gianni Infantino is already going to get his expanded World Cup in 2026, but why is he trying to bring that forward now?
Well, you can look at it from a sporting perspective in the fact he wants to give more countries more hope of going to the biggest football tournament on the planet. And there's another thing at play as well, potentially. His own credentials, if he can be seen as someone who perhaps brings the region together, you know, there's a distant possibility of the Nobel Prize, potentially. That's been always talked about by his predecessor, Sepp Blatter. So if he can see himself as this figure beyond sport, which is something he does like to consider him as, you see his speeches at the G20 and other political gatherings, it would be a considerable achievement if he could spread the World Cup in the region to make it a tournament beyond Qatar. But, you know, this has been talked about for so many years now, and probably it is something that would have been logical at the time of the vote to actually use multiple countries rather than it just being in Qatar, given the burden on resources and the number of stadiums needing to be built from scratch.
Right, and this brings me on to the next point, because if Qatar's World Cup is now shared, or could be shared with Kuwait and Oman or whoever else, what kind of precedent does that set for future bids?
Well, the key thing is it's rewriting the rules after the game has been played. The fact Qatar won the bid, in fact, even yesterday, the UAE government sports chief, Al Ramathi, told me actually Qatar deserved to win. It was a great success. Comments that were particularly striking given the severance of ties between the UAE and Qatar. But there'd be a number of factors in play here if additional countries are brought into the hosting, particularly given Qatar's win. There was an increased focus on human rights within FIFA. Qatar was required, obviously, to raise its standards. And when it came to the 2026 vote, the potential host had to submit really detailed risk assessments over human rights. And it's a point I made to Infantino a few months ago, which he saw, is the fact, actually, if you do bring new hosts into the plan for 2022, there will be demands for those hosts to be subject to human rights scrutiny and to check their standards are up to FIFA's. What FIFA might argue is the fact if no building work is required, particularly for the tournament, that might be a way of circumnavigating that. But it will add an extra layer of complexity, the human rights of any additional countries brought into the hosting.
Yeah, it certainly will. Rob Harris, thank you very much for joining us.